everybody. It's lucky I have a big voice because I can, even if the murmur of conversation is continuing, I can talk all over you. Welcome, everybody. My name's Stephen Sackur, and we're about to do a one-on-one. They called it an investigative interview here at St. Gallen. Just by way of a very brief introduction, I have the very great pleasure of being able to say I've been to the last, I think, 3 or 4 symposiums here at St. Gallen. I keep getting invited back. I'm not quite sure why, but I love coming back. This is a wonderful event to be at, to meet so many young people and a little bit older people who want to share their experiences, talk about public affairs. For me, as the presenter of the Hard Talk show on the BBC, this is just a wonderful way of sharing experiences without having that wretched camera and record button and the Hard Talk studio intimidating people. People like my guest today, Aubrey, for example. I'm going to introduce Aubrey in just a second. I should, before I introduce Aubrey, tell those of you who are relying upon your program for information about what is upcoming, I should just say that initially the plan was that we would have a one-on-one this morning with the Palestinian Minister for Foreign Affairs representing the Palestinian Authority, Riyad al-Maliki. Now, unfortunately, Mr. al-Maliki was told by the PA President, Mahmoud Abbas, that all ministers needed to stay in their home territory. I think he's contemplating a cabinet reshuffle. No word yet on whether Mr. al-Maliki has had good news or bad. That may filter through, but whatever the news, he was told he needed to stay at home. So he's not here. But I'm really, really delighted to say that on a very different theme, and I think Aubrey would agree, a very different sort of set of issues, we have what I think is going to be an extraordinarily interesting, challenging, and as a Hard Talk presenter, blimey, I was about to say provocative, but we're going beyond provocative over there, a provocative session. Let me introduce to you, and please give a very warm welcome to Aubrey de Grey, the founder of the SENS Foundation. I'll explain what that is in a second, but let's make Aubrey feel right at home. Now, Aubrey, maybe actually it'd be more effective for you to explain what your foundation, based on the West Coast in California, what your foundation is all about rather than have me do it. So just give me the very brief description of what your scientific research based out in California is all about.
Sure, thank you. Yes, so SENS Research Foundation is a biomedical research charity. We're based in the Bay Area, just south of San Francisco. And we are working to develop medicines that will bring aging under true medical control. We are working along the lines that I laid out in scientific papers and books and so on over the past 15 years or so, essentially to bring regenerative medicine to the problems of aging. Rather than trying to tackle the diseases of aging one at a time in the fundamentally unsuccessful way that we've been trying to do over the past decades, we're trying to attack the problem of aging as a unified network of interconnected processes that all give rise to the various types of ill health of old age.
Right, let me cut to the chase here. Is it your belief that aging is a disease? I mean, I've always assumed aging is just, well, you know, I speak as a stakeholder here. I've just, personal declaration of interest, I have just turned 50 in the last few weeks. My wife called it raging against aging because I immediately signed up for the London Marathon, and I've just done that too. So I am absolutely committed to pursuing this conversation to the very end. I want to know all about aging, but to me, aging is natural and inevitable. You seem to be saying it's a disease.
Right. The word disease is used in a very confusing and conflicting way in this regard. The way I like to think of it, really, is that aging is a kind of uber disease that incorporates all of the diseases like Alzheimer's and most cancers and cardiovascular disease and so on that predominantly affect the elderly. One other way of putting it, actually, would be to say that those diseases of old age are not really diseases in the sense that tuberculosis is a disease, because they are side effects of being alive in the first place. In that sense, they are natural, yes, but that doesn't mean that they're a good thing, and it certainly doesn't mean that they are not, in principle, amenable to medical intervention.
So you start from the base principle that science is now capable of preventing what we would regard, maybe most of us regard, as the natural process as we get older of, frankly, bits dropping off, us getting weaker, us gradually walking into the sunset of life. You think that's all avoidable, do you?
It's certainly not avoidable yet, but I do believe that we're within striking distance of developing medical technology that can make that a reality, yes.
Explain, I don't want to get too sciencey, but I think to have an interesting conversation, we have to have a little bit of a bit of science. Just explain to me what in the last few years are the scientific breakthroughs that lead you to believe that we are on the brink of ending our traditional assumptions about the inevitability of aging.
The key breakthroughs that I think really mattered the most were really about 20 years ago. They were in the 90s. And that was really what allowed me to come up with the general principle that we follow at Sense Research Foundation in the year 2000. So these were a variety of different breakthroughs, typically in the laboratory in mice, showing how various types of molecular and cellular damage that the body does to itself as I say, side effects of the body's normal operation, how those various types of damage could be repaired in very much the same way that we, get rid of the rust on a car or do other things to it when we take it in every year. Of course, the amount of maintenance, preventative maintenance that the law requires us to do to our cars is not enough, and that's why cars still fall apart after the time that they were designed to fall apart, more or less. But we also know that if we choose to do more comprehensive maintenance than that, as some people do, then we can make cars last 100 years in just as good functional condition as they were when they were built. It should be, in principle, exactly the same for any machine that does damage to itself as a side effect of its normal operation. And the human body is just such a machine. It's vastly more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, the human body is organic and the car is not. And you can replace, very straightforward, you can replace the engine of a car. Not quite so straightforward to replace organs. It can be done. Replace a brain, pretty much impossible. I can already see some pretty profound physical problems with your theory.
You're certainly asking the right question there.
Thank you. Well, I get paid a very small amount of money to ask questions, so that's good news. On one level it's good news, on one level it's bad news, because I am, let's face it, a classic stakeholder. I'm aging fast as hell, and you, whatever you say, you can't stop it, can you?
If anyone asks me to approve your next pay rise, I assure you I will do so.
Well,
but the question is, no, replacement is perfectly good as a way of doing preventative maintenance. In the case of an organ like the liver, you can just replace it wholesale. If you did that to the brain, as you say, that would rather defeat the object. But if you replace individual brain cells, that's completely different. Then you, of course, you must only do it at a certain rate in order to allow those new cells to incorporate properly into the cognitive network, so to speak. If you do things like this at the molecular level, at the subcellular level, then again you have even more ability to do repair by replacement and or just removal of garbage. A lot of the preventative maintenance that's required is just elimination of waste products that the body is not automatically eliminating on its own.
Is it your proposition then that if this replacement therapy, our knowledge of cells, molecules, and indeed genetics is employed in the right way, is it your proposition that there is no actual limit to human longevity?
That is exactly my proposition, yes. I feel that...
So we could live forever?
Subject to being hit by trucks or the world being hit by an asteroid or whatever, indeed. The thing is, the only reason that our risk of death goes up as we get older is because we are accumulating damage in our bodies that eventually causes our bodies not to work so well and then not to work at all. If that damage did not accumulate, there's absolutely no reason why our remaining lifespan should go down. In other words, why we shouldn't carry on having the same amount of future ahead of us.
Right. Fascinating, and I feel we're about to have quite a profound conversation, not just about science, but about, existential issues of what life is for and how we live it. But before we get into all of that, I just want to take a quick straw poll. This is going to be a very engaging session, and you guys are going to ask lots of the questions coming up quite soon. But before we get to questions, just a quick straw poll. Before Aubrey goes into the ramifications of his science-based theories. Hands up those who think right now, before we go into a big debate about it, hands up who instinctively thinks that this proposition that should science be employed in the right ways, in theory, we can all live forever, or at least for hundreds and hundreds of years, who thinks that is an attractive proposition? Who likes that idea? Right, well, I guess you're the self-defining optimists. Who thinks that, on the whole, that is probably a very bad idea, not just for ourselves, but for society as a whole? Well, yeah, I think the skeptics and the perhaps somewhat less optimistic are more in the majority here, quite clearly. Aubrey, does that surprise you?
I'm afraid not.
Because this is a particularly gloomy crowd, or?
Oh, no. Unfortunately, this is a very average crowd in that regard. The overwhelming majority of the audiences that I speak to have this preconception that it's a good thing that we have aging, and it would be a bad thing if we didn't. And the reason that this misconception, as I would like to say that it is so prevalent, is because there is a misconception about the underlying principles. In particular, hands up anyone in the audience who wants to get Alzheimer's disease.
We don't need a light to reveal a very limited vote for that one. I don't think we...
Okay, yeah. I'm going to ask a slightly harder question. Hands up anyone who thinks there is some age at which they would like to get Alzheimer's disease. I don't have any takers there either. Okay, and I very much doubt that I would have any takers if I replaced Alzheimer's disease with cardiovascular disease or cancer or diabetes or whatever, right? Now, the misconception, therefore, is that you think you can not want all those things, but you do want aging. That's not possible. These are all parts and parcel of aging. You can't have one without the other. We are not going to get rid of the diseases and disabilities of old age without getting rid of aging. Get over it.
Yeah, hang on. You're saying... I would suspect that I'm not alone in having a vision of my own demise, which involves, becoming a cuddly old grandpa and shuffling about in my slippers for a few years, and obviously not being as active and not running marathons anymore. But, as I said earlier, slowly sort of going into the sunset with a benign smile on my face and finally sort of, going to bed one night and not waking up. I know most people don't die like that, but you're suggesting that's impossible.
I'm suggesting that it's absolutely impossible to get into a situation where everybody dies like that, yes. The lucky people, if you could call them lucky, whose declining years are of the sort that you've just described, just happen to get some of the aspects of aging later than others, and therefore they end up dying of things that we choose not to give disease-like names to. But it's still no fun going downhill and becoming mentally and physically less functional.
Right. Okay. So I want to get to how societies would or will cope, because you clearly believe this is going to happen, that medical science will apply itself to this issue of aging, and that therefore we will all live for an awful long time, if not forever. Before we get to the ramifications, though, just one more point about the science, and this is about the priorities within science and the way health-based science in particular deals with the proposition you are putting forward. Do you believe that R&D around the world in big pharma and scientific institutes, healthcare institutes, currently is taking on board your message and putting more and more resource and intensive focus on the aging issue?
There certainly is a change going on, but it's happening far too slowly. Over the past year, there have been a couple of very high-profile announcements of new large companies that are getting into the aging space. Google created Calico, and much more recently, Craig Venter and Peter Diamandis got together and created a company called Human Longevity, Inc. These are very credible people who it's very hard to laugh at, and who have put a great deal of money and reputation behind the idea that we may, in the reasonably near term, make good progress in this area.
But frankly, most people would argue, I would rather feel that the research dollar go into the fight against cancer than the effort to extend life into the hundreds of years.
So this is the misconception I was talking about. I do not work on longevity. I work on health. I work on cancer and Alzheimer's and cardiovascular disease and so on. I just recognize that in order to actually succeed against those diseases, we need to tackle their original foundations, which are the metabolic side effects of being alive in the first place.
Right. Now, let's get on to more of these ramifications, and very soon I'm going to open this up, because I'm very well aware in this audience there are people of different generations with different perspectives on what you are suggesting. But the overall theme for this year's symposium is the clash of generations. And it seems to me, we've already heard this morning, this rather wonderful concept that, parents are at war with their children. And for the younger members of our audience, is it not a very scary proposition that the older generation is going to live longer, live more vigorously, healthier, and therefore, rather than shuffling off into the sunset, is going to be hanging on to positions of power and influence and all the top jobs forever? I mean, let's start to unpick how our society works when people live almost forever.
So I find it somewhat frustrating that I'm asked very often, including by the general public, questions like this, where
You
there
very
is
politely didn't say dumb questions, but that's clearly where you're...
You're so kind to put the words in my mouth. Because these questions are, of course, are asked on the assumption that it's going to be really hard to find answers, and furthermore, that if we don't find answers, we're going to be in a worse state than we are today. Now, if we look at the whole of progress through history, we see that whenever we've made major breakthroughs in solving some big problem that we had, then it's created new problems. And does that mean that we were wrong to solve the original problem? Of course not. It's like saying it's a terribly bad thing that we figured out how to essentially prevent most infectious diseases because it created the epidemic of age-related diseases that we have today, which were much less prevalent in the, let's say, 1700s, when half the kids that were born in the Western world died of tuberculosis and diphtheria and so on before the age of 1. So, of course we don't want to go back to a world like that, even though it has created a new problem. Now, for this particular new problem, it's trivial to think of ways in which society might reorganize itself to incentivize turnover of personnel within a given industry, for example, just, tax people more if they stay in the same job too long, whatever. It's a trivial thing compared to when you actually take a sense of proportion about the problem that we have today, the suffering and death that is caused by aging. So clearly, that is the priority, to solve this humanitarian problem, the fact that the overwhelming majority of suffering in the world is caused by aging.
But I'm struggling here because there are so many questions flooding through my mind. I mean, we need people to die. We do need that as collectively in this planet. I mean, what is our current world population? About 7 billion. Mm-hmm. If you could click your fingers and ensure that we all live to be hundreds of years old and maybe, who knows, live pretty much forever, what on earth happens to demographics? What happens to the planetary population?
Yeah, this is another great question.
Well, thank you very much. It's no good. We heard earlier we had reference to Matt Ridley, the rational optimist. It just strikes me you're the irrational optimist.
Okay.
Where's the rationality in saying, oh, well, you know what? Yeah, that's a problem, I agree, but we'll fix it somehow. It's irresponsible unless you can give me a sound basis to believe you know how it will be fixed.
I come back to first of all, let me give you the answer to the population question, the direct answer, which is that just as we solve other problems with technology, it's entirely correct that we have a population problem today, and the solution to it is to reduce the average person's environmental impact by, developing better renewable energy or nuclear fusion or whatever, so as to limit the amount of carbon utilization and, of course, other pollutants. That's how to allow the population problem to be alleviated, and that would apply just as much if we had more people. We must also remember that any demographic change that might be caused by the elimination of death from aging would be very slow. We're not going to have any 200-year-old people for another 100 years, whatever happens. That's fairly clear, right? So,
but in the meantime, the population is just growing exponentially.
No, it's not growing. It's not.
Well, who, you know,
If you
explain
look,
to me.
Okay, so let's do some simple calculations.
Yeah.
Turns out that at the moment, about 150,000 people die each day, right?
Right.
Of which about 2/3, it happens, die of aging.
Right.
Now, it turns out that about 350,000 people are born each day.
Right.
Okay. So if we only halved the birth rate, we'd have a declining population. Right. That's why actually the UN already says that by the middle of this century we're going to have a declining population globally. So actually, you know, we've got, of course, the trajectory would be changed if we had fewer deaths.
What would the birth rate have to get down to once your scientific healthcare advances have kicked in? I mean,
That all
the
depends.
birth rate would be so unbelievably low across the world, not just in the developed world, where already, of course, it's come right down, but it's mind-bending to believe that that would happen. And also, what kind of society? There'll be so few young people in this world of yours, compared, you know, proportionate to the number of older people, it would be a completely different demographic pyramid. And I just wonder how healthy a pyramid it would be.
That's the problem I'd like to have. You know, at the moment, we have a much bigger problem. We have a problem of not only a humanitarian problem, but also, as we've heard today, an economic problem of a lot of people just not having the ability to contribute wealth to society and having a miserable life at the same time.
Again, I'm well aware I'm asking a series of dumb questions, but I'm quite enjoying it, so I'll keep doing it. I happened to see on good old BBC World News yesterday a rather silly but lovely feature about a 95-year-old great-great-grandmother from Canada who is a star of some sort of geriatric Olympic Games. She can still do the high jump. She throws the javelin and the discus, admittedly not very far, but she can still do it. And she's 95. And, you know, on one level you think, absolutely fantastic, if only I'm able to do that when I'm 95. But on another level, you look at it and you think, ultimately, she still does look 95.
That's right.
And you know, in the 100-meter sprint, she's sprinting as best she can, but it ain't quick.
Right.
So
That's not the world that I'm trying to create.
right. So what is the 200-year-old person actually going to look like and be able to do in your world?
One answer, 25.
What?
They will be able to do what they could do when they were 25.
And what will they look like?
They will look the way that they looked when they were 25.
Wow.
The outside of the...
Everybody's eyes in the room are lighting up, and you are the guys who voted for aging earlier. But yeah. Well, I'm getting really freaked out here. They're all going to look. We're all going to be stuck looking like we did. I mean, God knows it was a nice problem, as you say, to have in some ways. But really, we're all going to look young forever.
Look and feel and function as one did as young adults. Why not? It's just the same as a vintage car.
No, but actually it's not, because you can. A vintage car has the design of its time, and you know. I mean, I wasn't designed to look this way. I was designed to have hair and, you know, everything else that's dropped off in recent years. So it's actually, that's not a fair comparison.
Oh, sure it is. I mean, the design of the human body hasn't changed over the years, whereas the designs of cars have.
Yeah.
So that means that certainly vintage cars look the way they did when they were built. But the point is they function just as well as they did when they were built.
Yeah, but my point is, in this brave new world of Aubrey de Greys in 200 years' time, you will approach a fellow human being, and you will have no idea from looking at them whether they're 25 or 225.
And that is another problem I'd like to have.
Am I just failing to get over my very boring preconceptions about the way the world should be and is?
I couldn't have put it better myself.
Right. Yeah, I don't know why you're all clapping, but just a final point for me, then we'll get on to much more intelligent questions from the audience. So it's not just about demographics, it's also about resources. You know, we worry all of the time about our ability to keep growing. We're obsessed with growth and economic growth, I mean, not not physical growth. And so we know that, and you've already referred to it, we have to adapt the way we live on this planet, but that's going to have to happen much more radically if you achieve what you want in terms of human longevity. Is it not?
Well, I mean, one thing that really we must focus on is that many of the other advances that we're making in the world are going to have similar scale effects more quickly. This is why I emphasize that we're not going to have any 200-year-olds for at least 100 years. Think about the changes that have happened just as a result of the internet. I mean, automation is continuing, right? When automation began, there was this thing called the Industrial Revolution. A lot of people were very scared of it, and they tried to stop it happening, because it was destroying lots of jobs. But I don't think, in hindsight, most people think these days that the Industrial Revolution was a bad idea. Most people are fairly in favor of the fact that we now have the opportunity to have people working in the service sector, which didn't exist back then to speak of, because we had to have everyone doing manufacturing and agriculture. Now, here's something that's going to happen. Automation is continuing. The service sector is losing jobs now, and it's going to carry on losing jobs. What's the third wave? How many people do we need in the entertainment industry? Not a lot, really. So fairly soon, we are going to have to bite the bullet that the service sector stopped us from having to bite before. In other words, we're going to have a completely new concept of what it means to have a job. And that's going to happen far sooner than anything that I work on.
It's the post-employment world. I mean,
exactly.
Jobs, as we've traditionally conceived them, will be a thing of the past
exactly.
for many people.
Exactly. So I'm just using this as an illustration. It's very, very easy to get worried about a post-aging world if you start from the assumption that nothing else is going to change. But that's an incorrect assumption.
What will people do for the second, third, fourth centuries of their lives?
They'll do what people like to do. They'll enrich each other's lives.
This has nothing to do with reproduction.
No.
So
that's the optional part.
So, how optional is it? I mean, could you apply what you believe to be the realities of cellular, molecular, genetic science today to massive, we're talking about extending life, but could you extend the reproductive life of, females I'm particularly thinking of at the moment?
Sure, absolutely. And what I should point out is that will have the opposite of the effect that you're thinking it's going to have.
Well,
you might think it's going to have the
I haven't even begun to think about it yet, but go on.
You might think intuitively that if women can continue to have kids safely at whatever age they are, then that would exacerbate the demographic problem, the overpopulation consequences of defeating aging. But actually, it would have the opposite effect. We can be almost certain, simply because if we look at throughout recent history at the demographic transitions that have occurred in various societies, when a particular society reaches a certain level of female emancipation and education and prosperity, fertility rates plummet, but at the same time, women choose, on average, to have their kids later. Now, of course, at the moment, they can only have them a little bit later because of reproductive lifespan. But it stands to reason that if there are reasons why women are choosing to have their kids a little bit later, then if they had the opportunity, then a lot of those women would have them later still. And that, of course, would ameliorate the demographic crisis that you're referring to.
I see. This is my last question before we open it up. To what extent, because you started out as a computer scientist, didn't you?
That's correct.
And you rather amusingly told me that because you married your wife is a biologist, it was because of interesting conversations over dinner that you became more and more interested in biology.
Well, that's how I became more and more knowledgeable about biology. I became interested in getting into it myself when I found out, to my utter horror, that not only my wife, but also pretty much every other biologist I was meeting, viewed aging as not really a problem, very much as most of you seem to have, until now, of course, viewed aging as not much of a problem. And I was motivated to realize that the problem I was working on beforehand, namely the development of better automation so that we wouldn't have to have jobs anymore, was actually only the world's second most important problem. And the world's most important problem was something that I needed to switch to.
Yeah, but you see, you couch it again as a problem. Here's my last question. Are you frightened of dying?
Not particularly like that, except insofar as I know that I'm making a contribution to helping the future of humanity, people's quality of life, as well as, of course, their quantity of life. No, I'm simply a regular guy. I'm forward planning to make sure that not only I, but everybody else is able to avoid the diseases and disabilities of old age that we're also not very fond of.
Yeah, but also you're seeking to put off, if not avoid, death.
That's a side effect. I'm seeking to put off, if not avoid, ill health.
But death is so fundamental to the way we live our lives. You know,
At the moment.
you don't have to be a philosopher to understand that everything we do is sort of predicated upon our demise. You know, if you think about everything from art to economics to, well, everything. It's all about us knowing that with life comes death. And you're saying, I'm going to take that assumption away from you all.
Well, there are people here who have decided that it's no longer true that if with life comes taxes, so why not death as well? Really? No, seriously. I mean, I think it's visionary people are necessary in the world. We only make progress because of people who are willing to aim high and not accept what is as being equivalent to what should be.
No, listen, I totally echo that, and it's just absolutely fascinating. And now I think we're going to get, having had the dumb questions, we're going to get the intelligent ones. So I call upon everybody. Oh God, there's loads of hands up. Whoa! We'll get through as many as we can. I obviously particularly want young leaders, stressing the word young. Although if you look 25, who knows? You may be 125. So, I'll start with you, sir, with your hand very prominently up in the middle section. Yes, you, sir. Stand up, sir. Stand up so they can see you with the microphone. Introduce yourself and then ask your question.
I'm Clement. I'm from France. Except that I think that your idea is going to make us live very tasteless, selfish, and very cynical lives. My question is that you seem to forget that nowadays most of the people on the earth are not fighting to live longer, but to live, period, because of a lack of efficiency in the distribution of wealth. Mm-hmm. If people, and especially wealthy ones, live longer and live for all, well, without an end, how do you tackle the question of the distribution of wealth?
Yeah, this is a very, very important question. Now, if we look at the way that society tolerates inequality today, we can see, of course, that different nations have different attitudes to what's acceptable in terms of inequality of access to a particular technology. And, of course, within a given society, there is some things are accepted. It's okay for them to be only available to the rich, and some things it's not considered acceptable. Now, if we look at which things come under which category in that regard, we notice a very interesting fact, which is that the things that we think it's okay to be limited by ability to pay are generally luxuries. You know, nobody seems to mind that only the rich have yachts, for example. Okay. Whereas everybody would mind that if the poor don't have clean drinking water, for example. Now, if we think about how things would be in the context of the availability of technology that would stop people from getting sick when they get older, then that's going to be a fairly fundamental human right. That's going to be something that people are not going to be happy to see limited by ability to pay. I believe, therefore, that even in really tax-averse societies like the USA, for example, that we will see people voting for enough taxation to make sure that these things are not limited by.
Why on earth do you believe that? I mean, look at the healthcare debate in America. I mean, you're implying a sort of a rational move toward a more just distribution of wealth that comes with democracy that doesn't appear to work in the real world.
You're absolutely right that this would not be the same as what we see in the healthcare system today. Of course, as I said, different countries are different. Some countries have a much more egalitarian healthcare system. But the thing is that at the moment, there's only so much we can do in relation to the ill health of old age. And therefore, the ability to live, let's say, an extra year or an extra 5 years is not seen as sufficiently important to motivate making sure that everybody can get at it.
But would you not accept the idea behind the gentleman's question, which is that it is very likely that if the science continues to proceed the way you think it will become a feature of the rich world, that people will get the treatments and the therapies and the cell and genetic, repairs that you outline. So the rich world will see people living longer and longer and longer and longer, and it will just be another form of global glaring global inequality.
What I'm saying is no, I do not think that's going to happen. Another reason why I don't think it's going to happen is that these medicines will pay for themselves so quickly. These medicines, unlike medicine for the elderly today, will be able to allow people of the older generations to maintain a sufficient level of function so that they can continue to contribute wealth to society rather than just consuming wealth. And therefore, these therapies will, pay for themselves very quickly. And therefore, it will be economically suicidal for any country not to front-load the investment so that everybody who is old enough to need these medicines actually has them and is not simply consuming wealth as they're sick.
Okay, well, we'll have a question down here. We'll take a few at once, so be very concise.
Don't do a few at once, I hate that. It's really hard. Yeah, can we just do one at a time?
All right, well, go on then.
Hi, my name's Tom. I'm from the U.S. I'm curious about the progress or changeover of ideas in a society. I feel that very often new ideas come from the young, and very often acceptance of those ideas comes from cohort replacement instead of widespread acceptance. That presumably wouldn't happen in this new world.
No, therefore there'd be a big problem here because there wouldn't be cohort replacement and the old ideas would be in place for longer.
I think it's very important to have turnover of occupation. I myself am an example of this. As you've just heard, I was originally a computer scientist. I had these, quite revolutionary ideas largely because I was able to come in with a new perspective into a field where I wouldn't probably have been able to have those ideas at the same time if I had spent all my life as a biologist being encumbered by all of the conventional wisdom of the field. So yes, I think it would be great if we had society structured in a manner that encouraged turnover so that people retired for only 20 years and then went back and had another 40 years doing a completely different career and so on. That's definitely how.
But of course, it wouldn't work that way. I mean, I just think this is just again one small sidebar issue, but it's quite important to your theories. I mean, people in power tend to like to cling on to power, but the fact is they get older and think of the classic photos of the Politburo in the 1970s in Soviet Russia. There they all were. Some of them were so knackered they could barely wave anymore, but they were sort of wheeled out to take the May Day parade as long as they were alive. Sometimes even when they were dead, they were still sort of doing that. But anyway, the fact is aging got them in the end, but in your world, aging wouldn't get them. So awful leaders, leaders that you really would like to see the back of, will just be there forever.
Yeah, people have said this, won't dictators live forever? Well, last I heard, dictator comes fairly high on the league table of risky jobs.
Well, on one level, yes, but think of Syria. Hafez al-Assad, he would have clung on to power and would have successfully clung on to power much longer had he not died, but he ensured that his son took over. But, there are lots of places where this idea that actually the aging process is conquered and eliminated would be regarded as extraordinarily awful by people who have, for all too long, had to live with terrible leadership.
I just want to come back again to the fact that we have a problem today, which people are very good at putting out of their minds, but the fact is that doesn't stop it from being a problem. The overwhelming majority of suffering in the world is caused by being sick. And the overwhelming majority of sickness in the world now, certainly it's been the developed world for a long time now, the whole world, is caused by getting old. I want to fix that second thing. I want to make sure that getting old does not mean getting sick. And I think that it's about time that everybody just woke up and realized that that would be a rather good thing because it would alleviate a great deal of suffering.
All right, let's get in a couple more quick-fire questions. You, sir, over on the side there. Yep, microphone's with you. Stand up and tell us who you are and a quick question.
Hi, I'm Anthony. I'm from Singapore. I'd just like to ask you what your views are on human augmentation. So not just, curing the diseases associated with old age.
Yeah, I don't really have a single view on human augmentation. I recognize certainly that many of the technologies that we will need to develop in order to eliminate aging and to bring aging under proper medical control will have applications beyond simple therapy, and in other words, applications that are better called enhancement. And of course, the merits of those applications must be looked at on a case-by-case basis, depending on exactly what type of enhancement we're talking about. So I don't have a single view.
Again, a bit off point, but is human cloning coming?
Human reproductive cloning is what you mean, right?
Yeah.
I think it's probably going to be possible. I don't think it's going to be a problem because I don't think there's any real call for it. It's not going to be anywhere near the safest way to create a new human being, I don't think ever. So there's no real reason to be worried about it.
It just kind of amuses me to think that not only are we going to live forever, but our clone is going to be around with us too. So anyway, right, a couple. Ma'am, yep, we'll get the microphone to you. Tell us who you are and a quick question.
Thank you. My name is Anisha. I'm from India, one of the leaders of tomorrow. I actually have more of a comment than a question, and I'd like to hear your views on it. In a strange, twisted way, I think if I were religious, I can't even begin to think if this scientific intervention would be considered pro-life or not. So I just wanted to know what your views are on this and how you see society reacting in that aspect.
Yeah, so I've occasionally discussed this with people coming from a religious perspective. I've spoken at theology conferences and so on, and it is an interesting question. It turns out to be rather easy to persuade people who are coming from that perspective that at least this is something they ought to think about, because the fact is, Holy Scripture, of whatever variety you choose to consult, is fairly clear that one ought to work to alleviate suffering. And, of course, one ought to work to save lives and so on. And and one shouldn't kill people and one shouldn't commit suicide.
But one shouldn't play God either.
Well, what is playing God? What is this term? It's a kind of undefined way of just saying, don't think about this anymore, really. I mean, is it playing God to eliminate tuberculosis? That's natural.
Isn't there something in the Bible about the natural lifespan being 70 years and 10 or something? You're rewriting that bit for a start.
There's something about the natural lifespan, that's right, yes. But there's nothing in Holy Scripture that says that humans are supposed not to interfere with nature. The fact is, all of technology, including all of medicine, is humans interfering with nature. It would be unnatural for us not to interfere with nature.
All right. We've got a couple more time. Well, I'm enjoying this, so we might have to be late for lunch. But anyway, I'm not supposed to say that. It's you, sir, on this side. Go on. Quick as you can.
Yes, I'll be very quick. Just one comment. Congratulations to the organizer, because I came as the leaders of tomorrow, and the only comment I have on your speech is, I want to die at some point, which is quite puzzling coming from the youngest perspective. So my question is very easy, and I'd like you to be quite specific. When exactly and how exactly would you like to die?
Right, so having an opinion about when you want to die is like, or when you think people in general should die, it's like having an opinion about what time you want to go to the toilet next Sunday. I mean,
that is going to be the quote of the conference. Johannes is already writing it down to put on the...
Let me elaborate in case anyone doesn't get it. The point is, you don't have an opinion about what time you want to go to the toilet next Sunday because you know that you're going to have better information on the topic near the time. Right. So, I mean, of course, you're fairly sure that you're probably going to want to go to the toilet sometime.
Yeah, I think we get the picture.
But also, but the point is, I know that I don't want to die anytime soon. I don't see any prospect of having any particular change of mind on that while I remain healthy.
But the point
why
is,
should I want...
I think actually it's a really interesting question. I wish I'd thought of it, because in the end, if one goes to the extreme end of your thinking, and we use this word for you could live forever, in the end, death will be a choice, and it will actually be suicide. I mean, we'd all be
Right.
committing suicide.
But we won't, because in general, when someone who is mentally and physically healthy wants to die sometime soon, we try to change their minds, and we're fairly pleased that there are organizations that are fairly good at changing their minds. Now, I mean, we have an organization in the UK called the Samaritans, which is where people pick up the phone and ring when they feel suicidal. Now, I've never rung the Samaritans, but I'm fairly sure that if you do, then the first thing they ask you is not how old you are, so that they can put the phone down if you're over 80. Yeah. Yeah.
But the bottom line is, you don't want to die.
I don't want to get sick. It happens that if I don't get sick, I won't want to die. But
Right, yeah, you want to live forever, yeah, okay. Right, I think it may have to be the last one because I can't ruin the schedule. I'm going to take the gentleman there standing up toward the back. Go on, sir. We'll just get you the microphone. Here it comes.
It's an upside of being tall, thanks. I think, first of all, your research brings a very new meaning to the notion of the older I get, the better I was. Actually discussed before.
Yeah.
I'm Karol, I'm Polish, by the way, sorry for not introducing. Very quick question. Are you involved in some sort of joint venture with the Rolling Stones? Thank you.
no, I'm not. But I'm sure that they could easily double our research budget if they chose to. And so if you can make an introduction, I'd be most grateful.
But I tell you what, one look at Keith Richards tells you that he hasn't actually been taking the serum, which makes you look like you're 25 when you're 75.
Shall we ask the audience whether any of them have changed their mind?
Yes, exactly. Before we have to wrap, but we took the poll at the beginning, and there were very few of you that were attracted to the proposition of living forever. Hands up, who is, having heard Aubrey's description of what science will be able to do, and talk through some of the ramifications for society and for our planet, who is now more attracted by the proposition? Actually, a substantial number of you. Hands up who still thinks it is, frankly, a really lousy idea. Right, well, I'd still say, Aubrey, I hate to break it to you, but still...
Hey, this was just one talk. If I can take the proportions from 10% to 20% in one talk, I'm pretty happy.
I have to say, you've done a pretty good job. Thank you very much. Aubrey, that was terrific. Thank you very much.